He doesn't miss you. He misses the mirror you once held to his wound. That invisible fracture in his soul, the one that was never yours to heal, felt less like a curse when you stood near it. You became the warm surface he could lean against, not because he saw you, but because he saw a softer reflection of himself in your eyes. It wasn't love. It was anesthesia. And when you're gone, he doesn't ache for your presence. He aches for the drug you unknowingly were. That's the quiet violence of it. He craves the relief, not the woman. And yet, for years, you mistook his hunger for devotion, his attachment for care. The truth is harder. He was not drawn to you for who you are, but for the way you made him forget who he is. There is a cruelty in being loved like that. To be wanted only when you play the role of balm, not when you are fully yourself. This kind of love doesn't hold you. It uses you. It thrives in the shadows of his unhealed history, feeding on the parts of you willing to bend. And you, thinking that bending was strength, stayed in shapes that made you unrecognizable to yourself. Every act of self-abandonment was applauded by his need. Every moment you put your voice second was met with the illusion of closeness. It is the oldest trap, to be valued not for your crown but for your kneeling. Jung would call it a projection, his wound cast outward, finding a host to carry it. He did not see you. He saw the echo of his own pain and believed you were the cure. But you cannot be the cure to a wound that refuses to close. That's why his longing now is not for the woman who walked away, but for the salve she embodied. And if you went back, you would see it. He would wrap himself in you like a familiar blanket, only until the comfort wore off. Then the wound would resurface, demanding more. It always does. The bitter truth is that he is not haunted by the nights you shared, nor the quiet moments where you laughed like the world outside didn't exist. He is haunted by the sudden absence of the relief you provided. And you, if you are honest, know this in your bones. You felt it in the way his eyes glazed when you spoke of your needs, but sharpened when you tended to his. You felt it in the way he would draw close after his storms, not yours. You were the harbor for his ship, but he never anchored for long, only until the sea inside him calmed. This kind of connection is an unspoken bargain. You give safety, he gives attachment. But safety given in imbalance becomes servitude, and attachment without seeing is a cage. The cost is quiet but devastating. You lose the mirror that reflects you to yourself. Your sense of worth becomes tied to his peace, as if you exist only when he is soothed. This is how queens forget they wear crowns. This is how warriors forget they carry swords. He does not miss the sound of your voice because it was yours. He misses it because it was the one that spoke to his shadow without asking him to confront it. You became the rare place where his flaws were not demanded to grow. And that is not love. It is refuge without responsibility. The danger is that you, too, began to mistake this for love. You began to find purpose in being the place where someone's darkness could rest. But purpose built on someone else's refusal to rise is a kingdom that will burn you to keep them warm. The mythology of women who heal broken men has always been seductive. It flatters the part of you that wants to believe you can love someone into wholeness. But there is a reason every ancient queen who traded her crown for a wounded king's comfort ended with an empty throne. The healing you offered was not met with equal restoration. You poured into a vessel with no bottom. And when you are gone, he is not mourning the vessel, only the ease of pouring without effort. It is time to strip away the illusion that his missing you is proof of your worth. If anything, it is proof of your role in his avoidance. When a man has not done the work to stand in his own light, he will seek yours, not to honor it, but to hide beneath it. And you, if you return, will find yourself dimming just to keep him from squinting. This is why leaving was an act of reclamation. It was the moment you stopped lending your light to a shadow that would never step into the sun. The question that remains is not whether he misses you. The question is, now that you see the truth, will you still miss him? Missing him becomes different once you understand what was truly being exchanged. It is no longer the ache of a lover lost. It is the ghost of a role you no longer want to play. What you feel is not the absence of a man, but the absence of the version of yourself who lived to keep him comfortable. That self was patient beyond reason, forgiving without limit, bending in ways that felt like devotion but were, in truth, a slow surrender of the spine. You are not mourning him. You are mourning the illusion that giving more could make you enough. When the spell breaks, the silence between you becomes sharper. It is no longer a pause filled with longing. It is a void where the performance used to live. His absence is not a wound to heal, but a space where your own voice can finally echo without interruption. You begin to see that what you called intimacy was often a form of surveillance over his moods. You measured your worth by how quickly you could soothe him, how little you could need in return. In this way, your heart was trained to serve, not to be held. This is the kind of bond Jung warned about, the anima and animus tangled, not in mutual growth, but in mutual escape from the work of individuation. You provided the sanctuary. He provided the script that made you believe this was love. And you followed it because somewhere deep in your story was the belief that a woman's highest value is in her ability to be chosen. Yet the truth is harsher and cleaner. He did not choose you. He chose what you allowed him to feel when he was with you. That is not partnership. That is utility. Think of it like a mirror in a darkened room. He came to you not to see you, but to see a softened version of himself. You angled the glass so he would not have to confront the cracks, and for a time, that felt like closeness. But what is closeness if it requires you to erase the parts of yourself that do not fit the reflection he wants to see? That kind of love is conditional on your silence, your compliance, your endless willingness to hold the weight of someone else's unresolved life. It is not love, it is dependency disguised as connection. When he reaches out now, if he does, it is not because he has awakened to your value. It is because the echo chamber you created is gone and the silence is uncomfortable. The wound is loud again, and he remembers that you were once the one who muffled it. This is not remorse, it is relapse. And the most dangerous thing you can do is mistake his discomfort for a change of heart. A man in pain will call anyone who used to be his shelter. A man transformed will walk into the storm and face it himself. The test is simple, though living it is not. Does he come back speaking of who you are or of what he has lost? Does he honor your boundaries as the sovereign guardrails they are, or does he circle them, looking for a way in? A man who sees you will respect the gates. A man who misses only his reflection will scale the walls. You must know which one stands before you, because the cost of confusion is your crown. This is where the shift begins. The moment you stop longing for the version of him who loved the role you played and start longing for the version of yourself who does not need that role to feel alive. That woman is not made in the shadow of his absence. She is forged in the clarity of her own worth. She does not ask to be chosen, she chooses herself. And in doing so, she becomes someone no projection can hold, no wound can consume, no absence can define. But the question that remains is this: if he came back tomorrow, carrying the same wound and the same hunger, would you still open the door? Opening the door to the same man is not an act of love, it is an act of forgetting. Forgetting the sleepless nights when his storms drowned out your needs. Forgetting the hollow look in his eyes when you dared to speak your truth. Forgetting the quiet decay of your own desires as you became the custodian of his comfort. Memory is a selective creature, and it will often romanticize the moments when you felt needed, while silencing the moments when you felt invisible. But healing demands a full memory, not a curated one. It demands you remember the weight as much as the warmth. A man who returns unchanged is not bringing you love. He is bringing you the same wound, wrapped in nostalgia. And nostalgia is dangerous. It paints over the fractures with gold dust, hiding the fact that the structure beneath is still weak. This is why so many women step back into the same patterns, believing this time will be different. They mistake the intensity of his pursuit for the depth of his change. But pursuit is not proof. A man can chase you with passion and still drag the same shadows behind him. In Jungian terms, the wound he carries is an archetypal shadow, one he has not yet integrated. Instead of facing it, he seeks someone who will live with it for him. You once accepted that role, thinking it was love, but in truth, it was an abdication of his own inner work. And every time you stepped in to soften the blow of life for him, you became an accomplice to his avoidance. This is the bitter paradox. You were both the shelter and the enabler. The more you carried, the less he had to. The less he had to, the less he grew. You might ask yourself why you stayed so long. The answer is often buried in the same soil, because somewhere in your own past, you were taught that love meant labor, that devotion meant endurance, that a good woman is one who holds the line in. No matter how heavy the weight becomes. And so you held and held and held until your hands were raw and your spirit bent. You learned to see your exhaustion as evidence of loyalty. But there is no crown in that kind of sacrifice, only chains. If you let him back in as he is, you are not just returning to him. You are returning to the version of yourself who tolerated the erosion of her own needs. That woman lived in a smaller room inside your soul, where the windows were covered, and the air was thick with the scent of compromise. She measured her worth by the state of another's healing, never noticing how her own was withering in the corner. To go back is to step willingly into that room again, and you know now it is too small for who you have become. Here is the truth that stings at first but frees you later. His longing for you is not proof of his love. It is proof of his dependence on what you represented. And dependence is not love. It is the fear of facing oneself. A man who truly loves will not ask you to be his shelter forever. He will learn to build his own. A man who only misses his reflection will return again and again, never to honor you, but to rest in the comfort you once gave. The cycle will not end until you refuse to be the resting place for someone unwilling to walk their own road. You are not here to be a mirror for a man's shadow. You are here to be the flame of your own life, burning bright enough to see the truth without flinching. And once you see it, the question shifts. It is no longer, does he miss me? But do I miss the person I was when I allowed this? And if you do, ask yourself why. Was it the certainty of being needed? Was it the rhythm of a role you knew too well? Or was it the illusion that love must always be tied to pain? Because if you can answer that, you will know exactly what door you must never open again. There comes a moment when you realize the ache you feel is not for him, but for the comfort of familiarity. Pain, when repeated long enough, becomes its own strange home. You knew the rules of that house, how to tiptoe when the air was tense, how to speak in a way that would not provoke the storm, how to stretch yourself thin without snapping. Leaving that behind is not just an act of liberation. It is an act of disorientation. Freedom feels foreign when you have been trained to live inside someone else's cage. This is why many women return, not because they still believe he is the one, but because the quiet of a life without him feels too vast, too uncertain. His chaos was heavy, but it was predictable. And predictability is seductive when your nervous system has been tuned to survival instead of peace. But make no mistake, returning to him is not a return to love. It is a return to the familiar patterns that kept you small, the same ones that taught you to confuse tension with passion and instability with depth. Jung spoke often of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating the parts of ourselves we have disowned. In this case, the part of you that must be integrated is the one that has been silenced for too long. She is the woman who remembers her own needs, who speaks without permission, who does not wrap her worth in the approval of the wounded. To embrace her is to dismantle the architecture of the role you once played. And that is the true work. Because if you do not, you will build the same prison again, just with different walls. The man you left may say he misses you, but what he truly misses is the absence of accountability you allowed him. He misses the soft landing where his patterns went unchallenged, the safety of knowing you would absorb the impact of his choices. That is not love. That is refuge without responsibility, and it cannot coexist with the kind of partnership you deserve. If you allow that back into your life, you are not choosing love. You are choosing to be consumed slowly by someone else's refusal to grow. There is a sovereignty that comes when you finally stop negotiating with the past. You see clearly that his desire to have you back is not a sign of transformation, but a sign of loss, his loss of access to what you gave freely. And you also see that your longing is not for him, but for the self you abandoned to keep him close. When you name that truth, the grip loosens, the nostalgia fades. The crown you set down in the name of love begins to fit your head again. The work now is not to wait for him to change, but to guard against the parts of you that would still be tempted if he didn't. Because the temptation will not come wearing red flags. It will come wrapped in memories of the way he once looked at you, the way he once said your name. But memories are not evidence of a future. They are only artifacts of a time when you were willing to give more than you received. The question is whether you are willing to go back to that bargain, knowing the cost. Because love in its truest form does not ask you to be less so someone else can be more. It does not require you to be the keeper of another's wounds at the expense of your own healing. It meets you as an equal, ready to walk beside you, not rest beneath you. Anything less is not love. It is need disguised in the language of longing. And once you can see the disguise, it loses its power. So when he says he misses you, hear it for what it is. Not a declaration of love, but a confession of dependency. And dependency, left unchecked, will consume you until you no longer remember the woman you were before him. The question is, will you let that happen again? To let it happen again would be to willingly re-enter the same labyrinth you once fought your way out of. And while the familiar corridors might seem less frightening now that you know their turns, the truth is that they would still lead you to the same center, a place where your worth is weighed against his comfort, and your needs are kept in the shadows. You might think you can navigate it differently this time, that awareness will shield you. But awareness without boundaries is just insight you'll betray the moment nostalgia knocks on your door. The danger lies in the part of you that still wants to be chosen. Even now, after all the truths you've uncovered, there may linger a quiet hope that he will return with eyes finally open, seeing you for who you are. That hope is not weakness. It is human. But it becomes dangerous when it overrides the evidence in front of you. Because a man who has not done the work to heal will not suddenly rise to meet you at your new height. He will pull you back to where he last knew how to hold you. Jung would call this the pull of the unconscious, the magnetic force of unresolved patterns. You are not just resisting him. You are resisting the version of yourself that still believes love must be earned through endurance. This is the woman who stayed up to soothe his chaos while ignoring her own. The woman who became fluent in his silences, reading every shift in his mood as a command to adjust herself. She is the one who will hear his voice and remember not the harm, but the warmth. And it is your task now to protect her from forgetting the cost. Because here is the truth that will not bend. He does not miss your essence, he misses your function. He misses the way you made his life easier without asking him to change. He misses the comfort of being known without being challenged, of being loved without being required to grow. That is not intimacy. That is maintenance. And the more you confuse the two, the more you will find yourself building a home inside someone else's unfinished work. There is a sovereignty in stepping back and letting him face his own reflection without you there to soften it. It is the kind of sovereignty that feels cold at first, because it does not come with the familiar warmth of his presence. But in that coldness, something else grows, clarity. The clarity to see that love is not proven by who runs back, but by who stands still long enough to face their own shadow. The clarity to know that your role is not to hold someone together at the expense of your own wholeness. When you embrace that clarity, you no longer look at his longing as a measure of your worth. You see it as a map of his unhealed terrain, a terrain you once walked through, carrying more than your share, believing it would lead somewhere worth staying. But it never did. It circled back to the same place, over and over, until you finally stepped out. And now that you are out, the only way to protect your freedom is to refuse the invitation to return. You are not cold for refusing. You are not heartless for closing the door. You are the guardian of the self you have fought to reclaim. And if that self feels stronger now, it is because she has seen what happens when her power is given away in the name of love. She knows now that love which drains is not love at all. It is a bargain that demands more than it gives and leaves you smaller than you were before. So if he calls, if he knocks, if he stands in front of you with words dripping in sentiment, remember this. Longing without transformation is just the desire to repeat the past. And the past, no matter how familiar, is not where your crown belongs. The question is, will you honor the woman you have become enough to let him miss you forever? To let him miss you forever is not cruelty, it is mercy. Mercy for yourself because you no longer volunteer to live in the shadow of his wound. Mercy for him because by refusing to be the salve he leans on, you hand him back the responsibility of his own healing. Anything less keeps you both trapped, him in the cycle of avoidance, you in the cycle of overgiving. Breaking that bond is not an act of revenge, it is an act of truth. And truth, though sharp, is the only blade that can cut the thread between love and dependency. It is tempting to believe that time apart might change him, that distance might stir him into the work he's been avoiding. But time alone does not heal what a man refuses to confront. Without the willingness to look inward, absence becomes just another space to fill, with distraction, with denial, with someone else willing to take the role you've abandoned. And if he does return, unchanged, it will not be because he has realized your worth. It will be because he has realized how much easier life was when you absorbed the weight for him. Jung taught that every unintegrated shadow seeks an external container. For him, you were that container, a place where the darkest parts of him could rest without having to evolve. And for a time, you may have believed that carrying this weight was proof of your love. But love that costs you your selfhood is not love. It is servitude dressed in romance. The longer you hold that weight, the more invisible you become, even to yourself. This is why stepping away is not abandonment, it is emergence. The emergence is slow at first. You begin by noticing the quiet, the absence of his chaos, the absence of the constant calculation of his moods. That quiet might feel unsettling because your nervous system has been trained to mistake intensity for connection. But in that stillness, something begins to take root. You hear your own thoughts more clearly. You remember what it feels like to have needs without apology. You begin to see that the parts of you that were labeled too much were never too much. They were simply too real for someone who needed you small. And in that recognition, the bond starts to dissolve, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You see that he doesn't miss you, he misses the relief you gave him from himself. You see that you don't miss him, you miss the illusion that your giving could change him. When both illusions collapse, what remains is the truth. Two people, each responsible for their own healing, each free to walk their own road. And on your road, there is no space for a man who will not meet you as an equal. This is where the myth shifts. You are no longer the woman who heals the wounded man at the cost of her own soul. You are the queen who knows her power and does not place it in the hands of those who will not rise beside her. You are the warrior who has laid down the shield she once used to protect another and picked up the sword that protects herself. You are not waiting for him to return. You are walking forward, crown steady, eyes fixed on the horizon of your own life. And if his voice ever reaches you again, dripping with the familiar longing, you will hear it for what it is, not a call to return, but an echo of a past you have already outgrown. You will know that the greatest act of love you can offer now is the love you give yourself by not stepping back into that past. Because you understand at last, it was never you he could not live without. It was the shelter you gave his shadow, and you have no more rooms to rent to ghosts. The only question left is, when the longing knocks again, will you answer, or will you let the silence speak for you? Letting the silence speak for you is the most sovereign answer you can give. Silence does not negotiate, it does not explain, it does not offer soft landings. Silence is the closing of the gate without ceremony. It tells him without a single word that the kingdom he once entered without earning his place is no longer open to him. For a man used to your endless words, your endless patience, your endless, let's talk about this. Silence is the loudest language you will ever speak. And yet, silence is not just for him. It is for you. In it, you learn that your worth does not need constant proving, that your boundaries are not up for debate. You discover the power in choosing not to be accessible to every knock on your door. You learn that absence can be a gift, not the absence of yourself, but the absence of those who could not meet you where you stand. This is the shift from being needed to being respected. And once you have tasted respect for yourself, you will never again settle for the counterfeit intimacy of dependency. The truth is, he may never understand why you left for good. He may rewrite the story in his mind, painting himself as the wronged one, the abandoned one, the victim of your coldness. Let him. You are no longer responsible for the version of you that lives in his head. Your only responsibility is to the version of you that lives in your own life. And that woman does not answer to the voice of the wound, no matter how familiar it sounds. Jung said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. This is the heart of your transformation. Before, you might have believed it was fate to meet a man like him, fate to be drawn to his darkness, fate to try to heal it. But now you see the truth. It was not fate, it was pattern. And patterns can be broken when you refuse to play your old role. That refusal is the birth of a new fate, one in which you are no longer cast as the caretaker of someone else's shadow. There will be days when you still feel the pull. This is natural. Patterns do not dissolve without echoes. You may dream of him, hear a song that reminds you of the early days, catch yourself wondering if maybe, somehow, this time would be different. But each time you return to the truth, not the curated memories, not the golden moments stripped of context, but the whole truth. And the whole truth will always bring you back to your own door, where you stand, crown on your head, refusing entry to anything less than what honors your worth. It is here, in this steadfastness, that the myth of you changes. You are no longer the woman defined by who she can save. You are defined by what she will no longer allow. This is the alchemy of self-worth, turning the lead of old wounds into the gold of new boundaries. And in that gold, you will find a life that no longer depends on whether or not someone misses you, because your value is no longer measured in someone else's longing. And so the final truth becomes clear. He does not miss you, not truly. He misses the reflection of his inner wound that you once softened. And you, finally, miss nothing about the place you had to shrink to in order to keep him close. The story is finished, the pattern broken, the gate closed. Now the only path ahead is the one you walk for yourself.